Hello, everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some demographics, uh, population in the US, and so forth. So let's just get right into it. If we look at the various groups that we have, ethnicity-wise, we see that Euro-Americans still are the dominant group as far as population numbers go. In fact, you see here about 64% of the population is Euro-American. That's just under 2/3. If we look at the total minority population, it's just over a third, 36%. And we can look down and we can find out quite a few things just about the makeup of America. The one group that happens to be missing here from these minority groups, in particular, is Native Americans. Um, but otherwise, we can see that Latino Americans are about 16% of the US population, African Americans about 13%, Asian Americans about 5%, and Arab Americans about 0.5%. When it comes to the African American population, what's interesting is they have leveled off for a number of decades now at about 13%. And so they have been surpassed in numbers anyway, as percent of population, by Latinos. Now we can look at the next column, the one next over, growth rate. And we really see that overall the American population is growing at about 10%. But there are some real disparities in where that growth is happening. If we look to the large group again of Euro-Americans, we see that the growth rate here is only 8%. So that's fairly small. But when we combine all the other minority groups, we see that they're up around 30% growth. So quite a bit higher. And then within that group, if we look at the four groups here, certainly Asian Americans have the largest growth rate of all the groups. So today it is true that the Asian American immigrants have surpassed Latino American immigrants. Although in the last 3 years with this new administration we have in the country, it's really hard to say what the trends are going to be into the future. But all things do pass in time. We see the growth rate is fairly steady for African Americans overall at about 14%, but it is also higher than Euro Americans as well. And then Arab Americans, of course, coming in at around 23% growth rate. So all the major groups are certainly growing at a faster rate than the Euro Americans, the dominant cultural group in our country. We look at median age. We see that the median age, if we average everybody in, it's 37 years old. But we see that slightly older for Euro Americans than the other groups. In fact, at 41, they are 7 years older than Asian Americans, which are the next highest group at 34. The youngest population we have in America really is the Latino Americans. And we don't really have information, as you can see in a few places, for median age overall of all minorities. And sometimes they're just not counted, as simple as that. Here's a look at our workforce as of 10 years ago, taking a look at it by ethnicity and gender. So if you look at the pie chart on the left, we see that the red, 32% of workforce is Euro-American women, so white women, and 32% is Euro-American men. So there's that 64%. And you can see how the other groups are divided up by the percentages that we saw in the previous table. On the right, we have a pie chart showing us the percent of senior level managers for Fortune 500 companies. Now, senior level means not just CEOs and presidents. So normally we look at, oh, it's a 5% figure for women and minorities to break into those sorts of jobs. But when we say senior level managers, we're also including vice presidents and so forth. And so we see about 20% really are the most senior are Euro-American, are American women, let me put it that way, Euro-American women and minorities. Just 20% of those managers and 80% happen to be Euro-American men. So there are different ways to look at these demographics and so forth and to interpret them. Well, let's talk about diversity. Diversity is a major factor in the workplace today, one of the major challenges for managers of all types. Where's the least diverse region of the country? It's right here in the Midwest. The Midwest in general is 78% Euro-American. And it's quite true. If you go to any of the larger cities in the Midwest, you just do not see the cosmopolitan sort of mix that you see in most other large cities in the country, whether they're on the West Coast or in the South or on the East Coast or wherever. Generally, we see a different mix of people. And I would say that those regions are probably more aware of diversity because, well, they're encountering it on a daily basis. And out here, we are not getting that valuable opportunity to interact with other cultures and ethnicities and so forth. The most diverse area in the country by region is the West, where nearly half, 47% here. These figures are a few years old, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if we were very close to 50-50. But the West certainly is the most diverse when it comes to minority populations. We can look at it by states. Where are the greatest concentrations of minority populations? And remember, this could be any group other than Euro-Americans. So in Hawaii, for instance, 88% of the population is considered a minority population, and they have a very high concentration of Native Hawaiians, but they also have some other groups there, and in particular, the Japanese, who have had a presence in the islands for generations. If we look at District of Columbia, it's more than just the city of Washington, D.C. It's also all those suburbs and so forth that make up the district. 65% of the District of Columbia is comprised of a minority population. City itself is much higher. California, New Mexico, 60% of the populations there are more than half. They're at 60%. And in Texas, more than half of the population is different ethnicities other than Euro-Americans at 55. If we look around and say, what states have the most minority groups of all? Well, that certainly has to be California. Now remember, the Latino world and the Asian American worlds both contain many, many cultures. They're not monoliths. There are many different flavors of people within there. And so it just so happens that in California, there are many different groups of Asians, many groups of Arab Americans, many different groups from the Latinx world and so forth. So for the sheer number of different minority groups that are present in any given state, it has to be California has the most minority groups. We look at the state that's had the most growth in minority populations. It is certainly Nevada. They grew the most at a 78% increase in their minority population just in the last 10 years or so. And so now they are about 50-50 between Euro-Americans and the other minority groups and so forth. The states with the highest Euro-American populations, certainly these are still clustered mainly in the New England area. So we have Maine and Vermont, 94% of the people living there are all Euro-American. New Hampshire, 92%. And then just a little bit to the east, in a more isolated region, really, West Virginia, 93% Euro-American, has historically been mostly Euro-American throughout its history. It is in the Appalachians. It's not in the most easy to get to areas and so forth. And it's not one of the richest states either from that sort of point of view. And they do have the highest percentages of Euro-Americans in the country. Now, if we look at the most balanced cities by ethnicities, or what is the greatest amount or least amount, we'd have to say Oakland in California is the most balanced city by ethnicity. They have fairly equal numbers of African Americans and some Asian Americans and Euro Americans, and it is a fairly balanced mix there. If we want to say where is the highest concentration of African Americans, what city in the United States? It has to be Detroit. In fact, at 81%, Detroit, Michigan is the least diverse city in the United States because it is 81% African American. And the same sort of thinking, El Paso in Texas, the most Latino American city that we have. It is the second least diverse, right behind Detroit. Okay, folks, I think that's all I want to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.